It was one of those cold evenings when the wind bites through the layers of clothes and makes you wish for something warmer. The streets were mostly quiet, except for the occasional car passing by, the hum of the engine breaking the silence. The air felt heavy, and the dark sky was almost suffocating, as if the clouds were waiting to release the weight they carried. At a bus stop on the corner, a young man stood alone, his hands stuffed deep into his pockets trying to keep warm. His jacket was old, faded from years of wear, but it was all he had. His shoes, too, had seen better days, the soles thinning from all the miles he'd walked. He was tired, his long shift at the small store where he worked weighing him down, but he knew he still had to make it home. His mind wandered a bit, thinking of his small apartment and the dinner he'd make when he got there. A simple meal, but it was his. The streetlight above flickered once, casting an uneven light on the pavement. He looked around, barely noticing the handful of people waiting for the bus. It was one of those moments when everything feels ordinary, and you can't help but wonder if anything surprising will happen. Little did he know, tonight was about to be different. Standing a few feet away was a woman, her back slightly hunched as she tried to protect herself from the biting cold. She was clearly uncomfortable, her coat not quite enough to shield her from the chill. It was a nice coat, dark and stylish, but it didn't seem to offer much warmth. She stood with her arms wrapped tightly around her body, her shoulders pulled up toward her ears as if trying to make herself as small as possible against the wind. The young man couldn't help but notice her. She didn't look like she was from around here. She was well-dressed, with her hair pulled back neatly and a kind of elegance about her that was hard to ignore. Despite the cold, she was standing there waiting, as if it was just another regular evening. But there was something about her that made him feel like she didn't quite belong to this quiet street corner. He looked down at his own jacket, and for a second, he felt self-conscious. What could he do to help her? He didn't have much to offer. His own clothes were all he had, but it didn't seem right for someone like her to be out in the cold without any help. He thought about the time he had spent on the streets before, how every small act of kindness had felt like a lifeline. Maybe this could be one of those moments. Without really thinking it through, he took off his jacket and walked over to her. She didn't see him approach at first, lost in her own thoughts, but as he got closer, she turned her head and saw him standing there. "You look cold," he said, offering the jacket with a small smile. "Here, you can have my jacket." The woman blinked in surprise. Her eyes widened for just a moment, and for a second, she didn't know how to react. She was clearly taken aback by the gesture, not expecting it in the slightest. She glanced at the jacket, then back at him, her expression softening. "That's kind of you," she said quietly, her voice tinged with gratitude. "But are you sure?" He nodded. "Yeah, I'm fine. I have a sweater underneath. You need it more than I do." There was a pause as the woman hesitated, looking at the jacket in his hand. Then with a smile, she accepted it. "Thank you," she said again, wrapping the jacket around her shoulders. "You're very kind." It wasn't a grand gesture, but it felt important. Something simple, like offering your jacket to someone in need, had a way of making a small difference in the world, even if you didn't realize it at the time. The young man watched as she pulled the jacket tighter around herself, feeling a strange sense of pride. It wasn't much, but it was something. They stood in silence for a few moments, the only sound being the occasional rumble of traffic in the distance. The woman, now a little warmer, looked up at him again. "I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name," she said. The young man shook his head. "No need for names. I'm just a guy waiting for the bus." She smiled, a little uncertain but appreciative of his honesty. There was something about him that made her feel at ease despite the cold and the strange situation. She looked down at the jacket she was wearing. It was an old thing, not the kind of coat she would wear on a typical day. She had a wardrobe full of designer clothes, yet here she was wearing a jacket given by a stranger. The thought made her smile. Sometimes it was the simple things that mattered most. "Do you come here often?" she asked, trying to make conversation. He nodded. "Yeah, I work nearby. Just finished a shift, heading home." Her curiosity piqued. She couldn't help but ask, "What kind of work do you do?" He scratched the back of his neck. "Oh, nothing special. Just a cashier at a small store. It's not much, but it gets me by." She nodded, her gaze lingering on him for a moment longer than usual. There was something about him, something that made her think he wasn't as ordinary as he seemed. But she didn't press the issue. Instead, she decided to share a little more about herself. "I work in business," she said, her tone more relaxed now. "I'm a CEO of a company, actually." The young man raised his eyebrows in surprise. She didn't look like someone who would be a CEO. She looked down to earth like someone you could meet anywhere. But then again, people were full of surprises. "That's impressive," he said with a smile. "I wouldn't have guessed." She chuckled softly. "I get that a lot. People don't expect me to be in charge of anything, let alone a whole company." They both laughed, and the conversation continued in a way that felt easy, natural even. The bus arrived, and as they both stood up to board, the young man motioned to the seats inside. "After you," he said. She hesitated for a moment, but then nodded her thanks and climbed aboard. The bus was relatively empty, and they found seats across from each other. The woman settled into her seat, still wrapped in the jacket he had given her. For a moment, there was a comfortable silence between them as the bus began to move. As they drove through the city streets, the young man found himself glancing at her from time to time. There was something about her that intrigued him, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. She wasn't just a CEO. There was an ease about her, a kind of openness that was rare in the business world. He cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "So what do you do when you're not running a company?" She smiled at the question, glad for the change in conversation. "I like to keep things simple. Reading, going for walks. Sometimes I just need to step away from the chaos." "I get that," he replied. "Sometimes you just need a break from it all." As they continued to talk, the bus rumbled on, and the young man began to feel a sense of warmth, both from the conversation and the simple act of kindness that had started it all. They didn't know each other, but for some reason that didn't matter. It felt as though they had been talking for much longer than just a few minutes. The woman glanced out the window, her thoughts drifting for a moment. She had no idea what had brought her to this bus stop tonight, but somehow it felt like a moment of connection she hadn't expected. She wasn't used to this kind of interaction, not in her world of boardrooms and high-stakes meetings. Yet here she was, sitting next to a stranger who had shown her more kindness in a few minutes than most people did in a lifetime. The bus made its way through the city, the lights casting long shadows on the streets as they drove on. Neither of them knew what the future held, but at that moment they both shared something simple, something real. A moment of human connection. The bus ride seemed to stretch on longer than either of them expected. The night was deepening, and the city streets were quieter now, the usual bustle of traffic slowing down as the evening wore on. The young man glanced out the window, watching the familiar sights of the city pass by, but his mind wasn't really on the streets. It was on the woman sitting across from him. She was still wearing his jacket, and he couldn't help but notice how it looked on her. It was an old thing, a bit worn, but somehow it seemed to fit her in a way he hadn't expected. There was something about the way she carried herself, something confident yet humble that made her stand out. She didn't seem out of place in that jacket, though he knew it was a far cry from the tailored suits she must usually wear in her world. As the bus bumped along, the woman turned her gaze toward him. "You know," she began, breaking the silence that had settled between them, "I don't think I've ever met someone like you." The young man looked up, a little surprised. "What do you mean? You seem different." "I mean, most people wouldn't offer their jacket to a stranger like that, especially someone they don't know." He shrugged, trying to downplay it. "It's just a jacket. I saw you were cold and it seemed like the right thing to do." She studied him for a moment, her eyes thoughtful. "I don't think it's just about the jacket," she said softly. "It's more about the person. You don't expect that kind of kindness from someone who doesn't have much to give." The young man felt a bit uncomfortable with the attention, but there was something about the way she said it that made him feel good. He wasn't looking for praise. He didn't do what he did for recognition. He just did what felt right in the moment, but still her words lingered in his mind. The bus passed by a few more streets, and for a while neither of them spoke. It was one of those quiet moments where you didn't need to say anything to feel the connection. The woman leaned back in her seat, her hand resting on the armrest as she looked out the window. He did the same, his thoughts drifting, trying to make sense of what had happened that evening. It wasn't every day that you met someone like her. Not just because of her position, but because of the way she carried herself. It was as though she was comfortable in her own skin, unpretentious despite the obvious wealth and power she must hold. She didn't speak in a way that demanded respect. She simply earned it without even trying. That was something he admired. The young man shifted in his seat, feeling a little restless. He wasn't used to these kinds of conversations. He had always kept to himself, keeping things simple. But there was something about her that made him feel like he could open up. Maybe it was because she didn't judge him. She didn't look at him like he was just another person in a crowd. She actually seemed to see him. After a while, she spoke again, her voice softer this time. You know, it's strange how the world works. Here I am, a CEO, and you're just a guy trying to get by. But in that moment when you offered me your jacket, you didn't care about all that. It was just two people, one helping the other. The young man wasn't sure how to respond. He hadn't really thought about it that way. He hadn't seen the difference between them, not in that moment. To him, she was just someone who needed help, and he was able to give it. That was all. Yeah, he said after a pause. Sometimes it's nice to forget about all that stuff. You know, the titles, the labels. It's just easier to be human. The woman smiled at that, her eyes lighting up. Exactly. That's what I've been missing in my life lately. Just being human. So much of what I do every day is about maintaining this image, being the person everyone expects me to be. But the truth is, I'm just like anyone else. I get tired, I get frustrated, I get lonely. The young man was surprised to hear her speak like this. He had imagined her life to be full of meetings, decisions, and constant pressure. He hadn't expected her to sound so vulnerable, but there was something real about her words, something raw. I don't think people always see that, he said quietly. They just see the success, the title. They don't see the person behind it. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. Yeah, it's like I'm constantly juggling all these expectations. And sometimes I wonder if people would still treat me the same if they knew the real me. If they knew I'm just me. The young man smiled at her honesty. It wasn't something he encountered often. I think it would make them respect you more. She looked at him, a soft laugh escaping her lips. That's sweet of you to say, but I'm not sure the world works like that. People get so caught up in titles and positions. It's hard to be seen for who you really are. The conversation fell into a comfortable silence again. The young man stared out the window, his thoughts spinning. He didn't have the answers to the things she was saying, but he could understand where she was coming from. Life wasn't easy, and the more you had, the more people seemed to expect from you. He couldn't imagine what it must be like to live in her shoes, constantly under pressure, never truly able to let down your guard. The bus made its way through the city, the lights reflecting off the windows as it passed by familiar landmarks. He had to admit the conversation had taken him by surprise. He hadn't expected to connect with someone like this, not in a million years. But there was something about her, something that made him feel like maybe there was more to life than just getting by. The woman broke the silence again. You know, I've been thinking about what you said, about forgetting the titles and labels. Maybe I need to take a step back and remember what it's like to just be me. He turned toward her, intrigued by her words. What do you mean? She smiled, a little uncertain. Maybe I need to step away from all the expectations, take some time for myself. I've been thinking about taking a break, getting away from the office, from all the chaos. He nodded. Sounds like a good idea. Everyone needs a break every once in a while. I don't know if I could do it, though, she said almost to herself. Everything is so dependent on me. If I step away, the whole thing could fall apart. He gave her a reassuring smile. You'd be surprised. Sometimes things work out better when you step back. People can surprise you when they're given a chance to step up. She seemed to consider this for a moment, then nodded slowly. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's time I let go a little. The bus slowed to a stop, and the young man realized that they had reached her stop. He hadn't even realized how much time had passed, lost in the flow of the conversation. As the doors opened, the woman stood up, her hands pulling the jacket tighter around her shoulders. Thank you again, she said, her voice warm. For the jacket. For the conversation. It's been a long time since I've talked like this. The young man stood as well, watching her. It was nothing, he replied. Just glad I could help. Before she stepped off the bus, she turned back to him, a thoughtful expression on her face. You know, I don't meet many people like you. People who are willing to help without expecting anything in return. I think that's rare. He smiled, a little embarrassed. I'm just doing what seems right, she nodded. Well, I hope you continue to do that. The world needs more people like you. With that, she stepped off the bus and disappeared into the night, leaving the young man standing there, thinking about the unexpected turn his evening had taken. He had never expected to meet someone like her, let alone have a conversation that made him reflect on his own life. But somehow he felt better for it, as if this one small moment had opened his eyes to something more than just the routine of his everyday existence. As the bus pulled away, he settled back into his seat, the city lights blurring past the window. There was a new feeling inside him, one that he couldn't quite name yet, but he knew deep down that something had shifted. Something was different now. The next few days felt different for the young man. Life continued as usual, working at the store, walking the familiar streets, and heading home to his small apartment. But something had changed within him, something he couldn't quite explain. The conversation with the woman on the bus had left a lasting impression. Her words about kindness, about stepping away from the pressures of life, had stuck with him. He found himself thinking about them more often than he expected. It wasn't just that she had seemed so kind and genuine, although that was part of it. It was also her honesty. She had shared a side of herself that most people didn't, especially someone in her position. The fact that she had been open about the difficulties of her life, the weight of expectations, and her own struggles made him feel like she wasn't as far removed from the rest of the world as he had imagined. The young man hadn't expected it, but he found himself wondering about her life. What kind of world did she live in? What did a day in her life look like? He knew she was a CEO, but that didn't tell him much. He didn't know what her company was, what kind of decisions she had to make, or what her daily routine involved. But the way she spoke about wanting a break, about wanting to let go for a while, it made him wonder if, beneath all the power and responsibility, she too longed for something simpler. One evening, a few days after their bus ride, the young man found himself walking to the same bus stop. It was a habit now, the quiet rhythm of his evening commute, even though he didn't expect to see her again. He wasn't sure why he had come back to that spot, but something inside him told him he needed to be there. He couldn't explain it, but he felt a pull. As he stood there waiting for the bus, he noticed a few people walking by, but no sign of her. Maybe it had been a one-time encounter. Maybe she was just passing through the city and he would never see her again. He wasn't sure what he hoped for. He wasn't sure if he even expected to see her again. But that strange feeling still lingered, the one that made him feel like there was more to their encounter than just a simple exchange of kindness. The bus arrived, and he boarded, his eyes scanning the seats for a familiar face. He sat down almost automatically as the bus pulled away from the curb. His mind wandered, thinking about the way the woman had looked at him, the way she had smiled when she talked about her life. It was hard to shake the feeling that there was something deeper beneath the surface, something that connected them despite how different their worlds seemed to be. As the bus moved through the city, the young man began to lose himself in thought. He wasn't paying attention to the people around him, lost in the memories of that night. But then, just as he was about to glance out the window, he noticed something, or rather, someone. There, sitting across from him, was the woman from the bus stop. She was dressed differently this time, wearing a business suit instead of the coat she had worn on their first meeting. She looked just as polished, her hair neatly pulled back, but there was something different about her this time. She looked tired, like she hadn't had a moment to herself in a long while. Her eyes were a little more tired, her shoulders a little more slumped than before. It was subtle, but it was there. The young man blinked in surprise, almost wondering if he had imagined it. Had it really been her? He hadn't expected to see her again. After all, this was just a random bus ride. But as she looked up and caught his eye, there was no mistaking it. It was her. He smiled, trying to hide his surprise. "Hey, fancy seeing you here?" She smiled back, though there was a hint of weariness in her expression. "I know, right? I don't usually take the bus, but today, I needed a break." The young man nodded. "Yeah, I get that. Sometimes it's nice to just get away from it all." She sighed, her shoulders slumping a little more. "Exactly. I've been so caught up in work lately, I haven't even had time to breathe. So today I decided to leave the office behind and just take a moment." There was something in her voice, a hint of exhaustion that hadn't been there before. The young man noticed it immediately. It seemed like she was truly worn out, not just physically, but emotionally. It was hard to imagine someone in her position feeling that way, but there it was. "Sounds like you've been under a lot of pressure," he said, his voice softer than usual. She nodded, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her briefcase. "It's more than just pressure, actually. It's the constant expectations, the never-ending tasks. And no matter how much I achieve, there's always more. Sometimes it feels like I'm chasing something I can't quite reach. The young man thought for a moment before speaking. I can't imagine what that must be like, but, maybe it's okay to take a step back every once in a while. You don't have to have everything figured out all the time. She looked at him, her gaze softening. I think you're right. But it's hard to give yourself permission to do that when everyone else is relying on you, when they expect you to always be strong, always have the answers. He nodded, understanding her words. I get it. But maybe the people around you wouldn't mind if you took a break. They might even respect you more for it. People need to see that you're human too. She smiled, but it was a tired smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. I wish it were that simple. They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the bus filling the space between them. The woman's words hung in the air, and the young man found himself wondering just how much she had to carry on her shoulders. He had always thought of CEOs as people who had everything under control, who knew exactly what they were doing. But here she was, someone who felt just as lost and overwhelmed as anyone else. After a few minutes, the woman spoke again, her voice quieter this time. I don't think I've ever had a conversation like this before. It's rare for me to talk to someone who isn't asking for something. I feel like I can actually breathe when I talk to you. The young man felt a warmth spread through him at her words. It wasn't about him. It was about the fact that she could finally let her guard down, even if just for a moment. He didn't have all the answers, but maybe in a small way, he was helping her see that she didn't always have to be the person everyone expected her to be. You don't have to be perfect all the time, he said, almost as if he were reassuring himself as much as he was reassuring her. It's okay to take a break. It's okay to let go sometimes. She looked at him, her expression softening. Maybe you're right. Maybe I need to stop trying so hard to be everything to everyone. The bus made a stop and the woman stood up. This is my stop, she said, looking at him with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. But thank you for listening, for reminding me that it's okay to not have it all figured out. The young man smiled, standing up as well. Anytime. I'm glad we talked. As she stepped off the bus, he watched her disappear into the night, her figure blending with the city's shadows. He couldn't help but wonder what would happen to her now. Would she take that step back, that much-needed break? Would she give herself the space she needed to breathe? He hoped so. The bus continued its journey, and the young man settled back into his seat, his mind racing. He hadn't expected their conversation to go the way it had. He hadn't expected to be the one to listen to her, to offer her the kind of comfort she seemed to need. But somehow it had felt right. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for now he felt like he had done something good. He had shared a moment with someone who needed it. And in the end, that was what mattered most. The days that followed felt different, though not in any obvious way. The young man continued his routine, heading to work, walking home, and finding small moments of peace between his busy schedule. But something had shifted inside him. That conversation with the woman on the bus, the way she opened up to him, had made him think in ways he hadn't before. He found himself reflecting more often, asking himself questions about the life he was living and whether he was truly happy with it. It wasn't that he disliked his life. He had everything he needed. He had a job that paid the bills, a roof over his head, and food on his table. But after that conversation with her, he realized that maybe he had been living on autopilot. He had been so focused on getting by, on making sure each day was just like the last, that he had forgotten to really live. For days he thought about what she had said. Maybe I need to take a step back. Maybe I need to let go. She had seemed so burdened by the weight of her life, and yet she had found a way to let someone in, even if just for a brief moment. He admired that. She had found a way to be vulnerable, and in doing so, she had reminded him of the importance of connection, of being seen even when life felt overwhelming. One evening, after his shift, the young man found himself standing at the bus stop again. He wasn't sure why he had come back, but he felt the pull. He stood there, hands in his pockets, looking down the street for any sign of the bus. The night was colder than usual, and the streets were quieter, almost too quiet. His breath came out in small puffs of white mist as he waited. And then, as if on cue, he saw her. She was standing a little further down the sidewalk, waiting for the same bus. She looked different than the last time he'd seen her. This time she was wearing a long coat, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, and there was a slight weariness in her eyes. She wasn't dressed in her usual business attire, and she didn't have the same polished appearance. In fact, she looked like she was just another person waiting for a bus just like him. He took a hesitant step toward her. There was something comforting about seeing her again. He wasn't sure why, but he felt like they had shared something that went beyond words. It wasn't just about offering a jacket. It was about a connection, a moment of understanding that neither of them had expected. He cleared his throat, taking another step forward. "Hey, I didn't expect to see you here." She turned her head in surprise, and when her eyes landed on him, she smiled. "I didn't expect to see you either," she said, her voice light. "But here we are." They stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say. There was a sense of familiarity between them now, as though they had shared more than just a bus ride and a conversation. It was the kind of connection that didn't need words to be understood. "So, what brings you here?" he asked, trying to ease the silence. She shrugged, her eyes briefly looking down at the ground. "I guess I'm just taking a break from everything. Life's been moving so fast lately, and I thought, maybe I should slow down for once." He smiled, understanding exactly what she meant. "I get that. It's easy to get caught up in the rush of it all." She nodded. "Yeah. Sometimes I forget that I'm human too, not just a CEO or a businesswoman. I get so caught up in the demands of my job that I forget what it feels like to just breathe." Her words struck a chord with him. He had been feeling the same way lately, caught in the cycle of his everyday life, focused only on getting through the next day, never really stopping to think about what he wanted out of life. He had been stuck in a routine, not fully aware of what he was missing. "So what are you doing to slow down?" he asked, genuinely curious. She chuckled, her eyes twinkling with a hint of amusement. "Well, right now I'm waiting for a bus." "That's step one," he laughed along with her. "Fair enough." As they continued talking, the young man found himself opening up more than he usually did. Something about her made him feel comfortable, like he could share parts of himself that he had kept hidden for so long. He told her about his work, his hopes, and the little things that brought him joy. In return, she shared more about her life, the challenges she faced as a CEO, and the pressure she felt every day to maintain her position. But there was more to her story than just the business world. She spoke about her childhood, about how she had grown up in a small town and how she had always dreamed of making a difference. The more she spoke, the more he realized that she wasn't just a CEO. She was a person with dreams, fears, and vulnerabilities just like everyone else. Their conversation flowed easily, and before either of them knew it, the bus had arrived. The young man stood up, offering her a polite gesture to go first. "After you," she smiled, taking the gesture with a nod. "Thank you." As they boarded the bus, they sat side by side, the world outside passing by unnoticed. For the first time in a long while, the young man felt at ease. It wasn't that he had everything figured out, but for once he didn't feel like he had to. There was something comforting about being with someone who didn't expect him to have all the answers. The woman looked at him as the bus moved through the quiet streets. "I've been thinking about what you said the other night," she said, her voice softer now. "About taking a step back. About letting go." He turned toward her, curious. "And?" She paused for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "I think you were right. I've been so focused on everything I need to do for others that I've forgotten to focus on myself. Maybe it's time I let myself take that break, let myself breathe." He nodded, smiling. "I think that's a good idea. We all need a break sometimes." She smiled back at him, her eyes grateful. "I don't think I've ever felt like I could just stop before. But now I'm starting to see that it's okay to take a step back." The young man was struck by the change in her. She didn't seem as weighed down as before. She seemed lighter, as if a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. Maybe it wasn't all gone, but she had taken the first step toward letting go of some of the pressure. And that, he realized, was a big thing. The bus continued its route, and they sat in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in their thoughts. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, though. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes, the kind that only happens when two people understand each other without having to say a word. As the bus neared her stop, the woman turned to him, her voice soft. "I really appreciate this, you know. Just talking like this. I don't get many opportunities to have a real conversation." The young man smiled. "I'm glad we could talk. Sometimes you just need someone to listen." She nodded, standing up as the bus slowed. "Well, thank you again. For everything." As she stepped off the bus, the young man watched her walk away, her figure disappearing into the night. He didn't know what the future held for either of them, but he couldn't shake the feeling that their paths had crossed for a reason. There was something about their conversations, something about the way they had connected, that made him believe there was more to life than just going through the motions. As the bus continued on its route, he leaned back in his seat, a sense of calm washing over him. He didn't have all the answers, but for once he wasn't looking for them. He had learned something important in these past few days, that sometimes all it takes is a simple act of kindness, a conversation with a stranger, to change the way you see the world. And that was enough for him. The days following their last bus ride felt like they belonged to someone else. The young man had gone back to his routine, but something had shifted within him, something that made the days feel less like mere repetition and more like moments that held meaning. It wasn't a dramatic change, not something that could be seen from the outside, but on the inside. He felt different. He was more aware of the small things, the way the sun filtered through the trees in the park, the quiet hum of the streets in the early morning, and the simple act of greeting people as he passed them by. He found himself thinking about the woman more than he had expected. Her words echoed in his mind, about taking a break, about stepping away from the pressure of life. He remembered the way her eyes had softened when she spoke of needing to breathe, and he couldn't help but admire the honesty in her voice. For someone in her position, someone with so much responsibility, it took courage to admit that she was tired, that she needed a moment for herself. It was a reminder to him, too. A reminder that it was okay to take a step back, to let go of the weight of everyday life and just breathe. Life didn't always have to be about moving forward, about working harder, about chasing success. Sometimes it was about pausing, about taking the time to appreciate what you had, to be present in the moment. A few weeks had passed since that last conversation on the bus, and the young man had made a small change in his life. He had started taking more time for himself. After work, he would take walks through the park, letting his mind wander, letting the quiet of the world around him calm the noise in his head. He had even started reading more, something he hadn't done in years. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A way to reclaim a piece of himself that he had forgotten along the way. One evening, as he was walking home from the store, he found himself at the same bus stop again. It wasn't intentional. He had simply ended up there, his feet carrying him without him realizing it. He paused for a moment, standing at the edge of the curb, looking down the street as cars passed by. The night was cool and the streetlights cast long shadows on the sidewalk. He wasn't sure why he had come back. Maybe it was because he had learned something from the woman, something that had stayed with him. Maybe he just wanted to see if fate would bring them together again, even though he knew it was unlikely. After all, the city was big and the chances of seeing someone again after such a brief encounter were slim. But as he stood there, lost in his thoughts, he saw her. She was walking down the sidewalk, her head down, her pace slow as if she was deep in thought. She was dressed simply in jeans and a jacket, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked different, somehow more relaxed than he remembered, like she had found some peace in the chaos of her life. For a moment he hesitated. Should he approach her? Would she even remember him? He wasn't sure. But then, before he could think too much about it, she looked up and their eyes met. Her face broke into a smile, and the young man felt a sense of relief wash over him. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said, her voice warm just like the last time they spoke. He smiled back, his heart light. "I didn't expect it either. But here we are." She stopped in front of him, glancing around. "It's funny, isn't it? How small the world feels sometimes. Like you just keep running into the same people even if you don't expect to." He nodded. "Yeah, it's strange. But I guess it's nice." For a moment, they both stood there in silence, just looking at each other. The young man wasn't sure what to say next, but it didn't feel awkward. It felt natural, like the last time they spoke. He could tell she had changed. There was a calmness to her now, a kind of peace that hadn't been there before. "How have you been?" he asked, genuinely curious. She shrugged, her eyes softening. "Better, actually. I've been trying to take your advice, taking a step back, letting go a little. It hasn't been easy, but I think I'm starting to get it." He smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. "I'm glad to hear that," she laughed softly. "It's been harder than I thought, though. I guess when you're used to always being on, it's tough to just switch off. But I'm learning. I've been taking more time for myself, Spending time with friends, doing things that make me happy. That sounds like a good start, he said. It's easy to forget that we need to take care of ourselves too. She nodded, her eyes thoughtful. Yeah, I think I forgot that for a long time. I got so wrapped up in everything else that I lost sight of what mattered. But now, I'm starting to remember who I really am, not just who everyone else expects me to be. The young man could see it in her eyes. There was a lightness to her now, a sense of freedom that hadn't been there before. She wasn't the same woman he had met at the bus stop all those weeks ago. She had found a way to reconnect with herself, to find balance in a life that had once been consumed by work and responsibility. I think we all forget sometimes, he said. It's easy to get lost in the grind and the day-to-day stuff. But when you step back, you realize that life is about more than just checking things off a list. She smiled, her expression sincere. Exactly. I've been trying to remind myself of that. It's hard, but I think I'm getting there. They stood there for a moment, the sounds of the city fading into the background. The young man felt a sense of connection with her that he hadn't felt with anyone in a long time. There was something about their conversations that made him feel understood, as if they had both been searching for the same thing without even realizing it. So, what now? He asked, breaking the silence. She looked at him, a spark of mischief in her eyes. Now? Now I think I'm going to take another step forward. I've been thinking about making some bigger changes in my life. Changes that will help me live more authentically. But for now, I'm just enjoying the moment. The young man nodded. That sounds like a good plan. Sometimes taking one small step is all it takes to change everything. She smiled, a genuine smile this time. You're right. One step at a time. As they stood there, talking about life, about change, about the future, the young man realized that this was what he had been waiting for. Not the grand achievements or the big successes, but moments like this. Simple, meaningful conversations that reminded him of what truly mattered. And in that moment, he understood that the journey wasn't about arriving at some distant destination, but about appreciating the small steps along the way. Whether it was offering a jacket to someone in need or taking the time to connect with another person, these moments were what made life rich. As the bus pulled up to the stop, they exchanged one last smile. The young man felt a sense of peace he hadn't known before, a sense of contentment that came from knowing he had shared something real with another person. She waved as she stepped onto the bus, her figure disappearing into the night. But the young man knew that their paths had crossed for a reason. It wasn't just about a jacket or a bus ride. It was about the connection they had shared, the understanding they had found in each other. He stood there, watching the bus drive away, a quiet smile on his face. Life was full of surprises, full of moments that could change everything. And maybe, just maybe, the best moments were the ones you least expected.